G'day legends and welcome back to Australia. I hope that so far you are having a fantastic week. Now today you're just going to have to give me a little bit of time. I am very jet lagged and I've been very busy today running around doing some appointments and testing to see if I am good to go to start chemotherapy in a few days. Of course, I would have loved to stay in the United States a little bit longer, but treatment was calling and I'm already pushing over my usual break. So legends, of course, as always, we do have a lot to go over. And today, well, we knew I was flying for a couple of days, and every time I fly, it turns out that a lot happens while I'm in the air and off any connection. So the biggest news of the day has been Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, cracking down, signing a bill that is weakening the anti-corruption bureaus. And then the government having oversight of the bureau that's meant to look internally and look at corruption from Zelensky or his party itself. And of course, this has now erupted in the largest protests we have seen since the beginning of the war. Relatively, yes, these are still small, but they're still the largest from the start of the war. And we're going to talk about how this can really weaken war effort. And many people I see online are going, this has nothing to do with the war. Yes, it does. When a country is at war, an all-out war, everything has to do with the war. It's like an organism. You push here and it bloody pulls there. That is how this happens. And Zelensky, he's gone on and cited Russian influence. But I question again, well, what is the Russian influence here? And we hear this thrown around of anything that has Russian influence then has to be cleaned up. But disagreement is not influence. It's like criticism is not anti-Semitism. And even if the Russians say one thing or a Russian page says one thing, and that may be correct, that doesn't then mean it is influence. So we're going to talk about that and how this is becoming a very big thing. And even Zelensky's most adamant supporters are very critical of this. And I guess finally, some people are actually looking and saying, hey, there actually may be corruption. And that a war, an all-out war when hundreds of billions of dollars flow in, that doesn't help fix corruption. We're going to talk about a plane that has gone down. We're going to look at drones. We're going to look at a breakthrough in Pokrovsk, as well as some geolocated footage. And of course, we do have a lot of maps to catch up on. So welcome back. I am glad to be back in Australia. So let's start here with this. Now, this is from the most pro-Ukrainian source you can get. Of course, the Kyiv Independent, an editorial saying Zelensky just betrayed Ukraine's democracy and everyone fighting for it. And this comes at a funny time because remember when I was back in the US last week and what I spoke about was this authoritarian shift that we see, as well as Zelensky undertaking the largest government shake-up since the beginning of the war. Let's look at the article. Last week, we warned of a coming anti-democratic backslide. Now, we see it happening. A parliamentary vote, led by Zelensky's lawmakers, today took away the independence of Ukraine's key anti-corruption bodies, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, NABU, and the Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, the SAPO. Zelensky signed it into law the very same day. So all at once, very quickly. And again, citing Russian influence. How much of that influence do we know? Well, how much influence is influence? And we talk about this when we see elections in Europe, Russian influence, and then it's thrown out. Well, how much influence is it? Did it actually influence anything? Did it actually overturn any votes? Or is it just a new scapegoat that you go, oh, there was influence, therefore we're going to get rid of it? Under the new law, the Prosecutor General, a notoriously non-independent figure, will now oversee anti-corruption investigations in a complete overturn of the system that was set up to be independent from other law enforcement bodies. So now it is not independent at all. That the Prosecutor General, a non-independent figure, will now oversee anti-corruption. You can see where this goes wrong. Well, actually, guys, what I'm going to do is we've got this pedo island over here, but we're going to investigate it ourselves. And nothing came of it, okay? An example, but you know what I mean. It's like if I get pulled over speeding, I'm like, oh, okay, Mr. Policeman, what I'll do is I'll actually investigate myself, mate. That should be all right. The move isn't an isolated incident, but part of a massive crackdown. The vote in Parliament followed an unprecedented wave of raids by dozens of NABU officers' homes the day before. So these people in the Anti-Corruption Bureau, they were getting their homes raided, where pretexts for searches range from drug trafficking, accusations to car accidents from 4 years ago. The NABU chief said some searches got violent. A local media outlet reported that officers opened up a detective's eyes to unlock his phone, set on face recognition. And we see images like this of the SBU, a very notorious intelligence security service, very notorious. Speak to anyone who's actually been to Ukraine or who lives in Ukraine, who's not just an online blogger, and they will tell you about the reputation of the SBU and these violent raids against people investigating corruption in their own government. And I'm a massive believer in, sorry, things are bloody loud around here, in that the sunlight is the best disinfectant. But of course, they may not want the disinfectant. It also closely follows an escalated prosecution of Ukraine's best-known anti-corruption activist and outspoken critic of Zelensky. This crackdown is being carried out by law enforcement agencies, lawmakers, and people controlled by Zelensky. There is no second-guessing who is responsible for this. Zelensky is making a choice to undermine Ukrainian democratic institutions in pursuit of expanding his political power. But why do it now? The attacked anti-corruption agencies have been a nuisance for the political elite, as they should be. They've investigated Zelensky's party lawmakers and the president's close associates. But just weeks ago, they went after his personal friend, then Deputy Prime Minister Oleksiy Chernysov, making him a suspect in a land grab case. There's talk of other close associates of Zelensky that detectives were investigating. In other words, they were doing exactly what they were set up for, independently investigating top-level corruption. Exactly why so much money isn't going towards where it needs to go, into the front line. It's worth remembering that Ukraine's anti-corruption infrastructure was set up in the years following the 2013-14 Euromaidan revolution. It was one of the wins of the democratic pro-Western movement that overthrew the corrupt pro-Russian president, and 100 protesters were killed before the revolution prevailed. We also have, before the invasion in 22, we actually see Putin talking about these institutions as being something to do with the Americans as well. A lot of this is very suspect at the moment. It took the lives of those protesters and years of work that followed to set up independent anti-corruption infrastructure in Ukraine, a major achievement for the young democracy. Now, President Zelensky is seeking to dismantle it to protect his associates and expand his power. The backdrop of the war is hugely helpful for this matter. Under martial law, there are no elections. Well, I thought having no elections was a fantastic thing. So now we are seeing people actually calling for elections. And perhaps more importantly, there have been no mass street protests. Many of the most politically active Ukrainians, patriotic and uncompromising, are serving on the front lines or have been killed fighting. And those that are the most patriotic, the most uncompromising, they are fighting and dying. The first anti-government protests since the start of the war are taking place right now as we're running this editorial. They are a reaction to today's vote, and they've likely slowed down Zelensky's signing of the bill. Although, I spoke to a few guys speaking about this, and he said, yeah, but a lot of those who are protesting are female. And the males, if they went to protest, well, the territorial control, they can come and they could then, recruit, but drag these guys off physically and conscript them and send them to the front. So that is a good way to push the brakes on any sort of unrest. But this is to a T how attritional warfare works. And exactly what you and I have been speaking about for some time, that if you are in a war of attrition, if you have a nick, it will become a gash, then it will become what's the word I'm looking for? It will become a catastrophic hemorrhage from what begins as a nick. And this is the quote I shared the other day: a corrupt government fighting a long war becomes its own worst enemy. In attritional war, the goal isn't to win quickly. It's to make your enemy rot from the inside out. And this is what lengthening of war, high loss, high expenditures, high pressure, that's what it does. It is possible to condition Ukrainian leadership in a way that protects democracy but doesn't undermine Ukraine's defense against Russia. In my opinion, that is impossible. That is all as one. But there is another source of oversight, the West. And it needs to use its leverage to help Ukraine stay a democracy. Historically, Ukraine's Western partners, the US and EU, have been a key force to pushing reluctant Ukrainian officials to carry out reforms, including in the anti-corruption and law enforcement sector, using the leverage of financial aid to condition Ukrainians to move. It was a simple deal. Western aid comes in return for democratic progress. Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion, Ukraine's partners have largely refrained from pushing for reforms. So they haven't been pushing for reforms while delivering billions. And that is where many people have issues, or at least hoist up the flag and say, hey, maybe we should look into this. But if you hoist up the flag and say, hey, can we actually look into this? It was the most corrupt country in Europe. Now we're sending billions. I'm not against that, but can we at least look into it? That became a Kremlin talking point. That became Russian influence. Therefore, you're not allowed to talk about it. The war and having a smooth relationship with Ukraine's leadership have been made a priority. When a conversation is already awkward due to refusal to supply the requested weapons, the West is reluctant to further sour it with nods at failed reforms. Supporting democracy in Ukraine is a task that can wait till after the war. That seemed to be the approach. The strategy has proved wrong, and it has led to today's dangerous backslide. The lack of interest from across the ocean has played a key role. US President Donald Trump's administration isn't one to defend anti-corruption reforms and only reluctantly pays attention to Ukraine at all. That's incorrect. They pay a massive amount of attention to Ukraine, but they actually want people to be working on outcomes here as well. And Trump and his administration does criticise a lot of Eastern Europe's practicing of democracy and European practicing of democracy as well. Evidently, certain actors in Ukraine perceived it as a free pass from Washington. It's not too late for Western partners to step in. It is possible to condition Ukrainian leadership in a way that protects democracy and doesn't undermine Ukraine's defence against Russia. Maybe, therefore, a vote. We know how that went down like a lead balloon. Military aid to Ukraine shouldn't be conditioned. The survival of Ukraine and its defenders remain the number one priority. For some, that should be it. The survival of Ukrainian people should be the number one priority, above territory and, of course, well above further enriching these people. But it will be hard for foreign governments to find a domestic support for such aid if Ukraine is allowed to slide into autocracy. The same man who represents Ukraine's fight against Russia can't represent the destruction of Ukraine's democracy. Every true supporter of Ukraine and Western governments needs to signal to Ukrainian leadership that the backslide is noted and won't go without consequences. I don't think we'll see any Western officials who are in the EU stand up against say, hey, this is wrong. Many, many things have happened similar to this before, from Americans getting shut down, persecuted in Ukraine for then posting media or opinions. I'm not holding my breath on this. If there is no such reaction, there is no reason to think the backslide will stop. There are, again, slippery slope. There are other elements of anti-corruption infrastructure that can be dismantled, such as the High Anti-Corruption Court. What's next on the menu? Independent Ukrainian media. What I'll say is that was day one. Even pre, the media was getting shut down. Absolutely, we've seen that. What do you think about the TV marathon? What do you think about certain people and channels not being allowed to report? And what do they cite? They cite Russian influence, because as soon as you cite that, credibility goes away and you can just put it all in a box and say this, even if people may have some point. I'm independent media. I'm as independent as you get, and I would not be comfortable visiting Ukraine anymore. Ukraine's democracy can still be salvaged. In peacetime, that responsibility will fall on the Ukrainian people. But firstly, Ukraine needs to survive, and Russia can exploit this as well. And Zelensky is giving an opening to exploit this in attritional war to rot from the inside out, like we have said, and the corrupt governments in a long war are their own worst enemy. And this does not look like an anti-corruption bureau getting a gun pointed at his head like this while he's already handcuffed behind his back. You know what I think about all of this? This is what I shared the other day when we then spoke about this, that nations don't just lose wars when they run out of bullets, but when they run out of belief. And a belief that everyone, from the politicians to those in the front, are all fighting for a cause. And as I said, the goal for Russia is not to win quickly, it's to rot your enemy from the inside out. That's why we're seeing a lot of breakthroughs as well, because of the rotting, the desertion, the massive losses, the inability to make compromise as well. And it was going, and as we have said, as I've been saying for several months, years, attritional war is bankruptcy. It goes little by little and then all at once. And we've seen this as a step, and we might see further steps. That's what I wrote. Ukraine is now showing true signs of what attritional warfare does to a country. After years of non-stop fighting, the army and people are exhausted, desertions are skyrocketing, and there's simply no manpower to rotate. And those who are left are less inclined and motivated to sign up. Given what Zelensky has done now, if you were thinking of deserting or you were thinking of signing up, I think this has given you I was going to say a gentle push, but I think it's given you an awful nudge. And those who are left, less motivated to sign up. And if you didn't sign up when Ukraine was winning, why would you sign up when they're losing? And when the government isn't behind its own reforms? Morale is breaking, and not just from battlefield losses. The government is seen as corrupt and willing to silence opposition, both in media and politically, with opposing voices, often with good intentions, threatened and silenced. Again, that sunlight is the best disinfectant. Inflation is surging, millions have fled, and many who will not return, and foreign investors, they're walking away. What do you think non-corruption, coming down on corruption bureaus do to foreign investment money coming into the nation? As I said, Ukraine is first and foremost its people, then the culture they carry, and only after that, the land. You cannot gamble the future of a nation on territorial goals, no matter how unjust the circumstances as well. Way down that list is enriching the further elites. That should never be a goal of anyone or anything. This is how attritional warfare works. It's not with sudden breakthroughs, but by bleeding a country dry, grinding down its will to fight, breaking its institution, and letting internal collapse do the work. That rot from the inside. And we're seeing even the largest supporters of Ukraine, people that I've been critical of before, make posts like this. Makes you wonder what kind of massive shit they've got on someone from Zelensky's inner circle for the bill to pass the radar and get signed into law in such a wild rush. Zelensky, not having vetoed this idiotic bill, already says everything you ever need to know about him as a leader and as an individual. The persona he presented to the world is bullshit. Even with almost unanimous rejection within his country from the outside partners, he isn't backing down. When you screw up so badly that all of your enemies tell you to stop and all of your allies tell you to stop, it's a pretty good sign to stop. And what we see is something that Tatogami Ue has spoken about in this, of these people going from extreme optimism to extreme pessimism in his interview with myself then earlier this year. Again and again, instead of addressing internal issues, Ukraine and the pro-Ukrainian community not only suppressed criticism, but allowed the situation within the Ukrainian army to deteriorate further. That's why I believe a lot of bloggers have blood on their hands. By the end of 24, this approach led to a full-blown crisis. Suddenly, Ukraine was facing severe manpower shortages, mobilisation struggles, and skyrocketing AWOL numbers. He talks about the case of the 155th. It became clear that these problems weren't isolated incidents, but the result of deep systemic failures that would require radical reforms and monumental efforts to fix. When people aren't gradually introduced to these issues, when they only understand the battlefield through the propaganda narratives, they swing from blind optimism to extreme pessimism, losing morale and faith entirely. And this isn't like this is a new thing that's popped up. Oh my God. As of today, they're cracking down on the people investigating corruption and media. It's not a new thing whatsoever. But when you are blinded because you only see it through a propaganda narrative, and then when it becomes exposed and when it's time to pay the piper, this is what then you get. So let's have a look at some bits on drones and planes that have occurred. Ukraine has lost a Mirage 2000 aircraft, with then Ukrainian Air Force posing this on the evening of July 22nd, 2025, a flight mission on Mirage 2000 and aviation equipment. Failure occurred. The pilot reported to the flight commander. He then acted competently, and then he successfully ejected, and his condition is stable. I believe this was in the west of the country. Now, what we know is that Russia is trying to get their manufacturing of Iran to 1,000 a day, or at least that is what is being reported. And what we can see here is these complete factories set up to absolutely pump these out on an industrial scale. Now, Again, this is why I push back so much on propaganda, because what propaganda does is it shows you through a lens of that propaganda what isn't true. And then you have that violent swing back. Everyone has been saying, and I still see this, that, oh, no, these are getting sent from Iran. This is not in Iran. It was licensed from here. And we even see now Ukraine copying the Iran then drone. But we see these are getting made on an industrial scale. And I think there's a bit of there's a photograph showing then just the amount of these getting made at one point in then factories like this. And what we know is Russia has the ability to fire hundreds per night with more hits at the moment. And that's going to, as you get more, you're actually going to, say you fire 100 with 90%. If you fire 200, it's still not going to have 90% interception. It's going to start lowering interception while there's an increase of drones as well. But if you can intercept 90% of 100, you're not going to intercept 90% of 1,000. So let's have a look at the maps. This, of course, is Ukraine in the center of the screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 2022, the purple since 2014, and the red check that you'll see on this map, of course, that is the ground Russia has made over a 24-hour period, but we'll be showing you a couple of days. One of the areas we've spoken about is Pokrovsk, and you can see this envelopment happening here of Pokrovsk. Russia working on the northern side, northeastern side, now working on the northern side, but what was the eastern side, and the western side as well, and creating a killing field in here. And this is what warfare like this then does when you get enveloped and your goal is attrition rather than movement. What we know is that we have seen Russians inside of Pokrovsk. Now, I'll show you some of this on the Telegram. You can go and watch the full thing. But at this geolocation here, which is approximately where my cursor is, we have this footage here. And this is a Ukrainian team getting ambushed by Russian reconnaissance forces, reconnaissance and recon forces ambushing right in the center of Pokrovsk. And we see that these were actually working in tandem with drones. So this is other footage here. So we see this is the vehicle that then gets ambushed by the Russian team on the ground. So we presume that this drone is talking to or relaying information to the team on the ground. Then the ambush is set, ambush kicks off, and then drones then target these Ukrainian vehicles as well. And Deep State, they say there could still be teams active. The liquidation of sabotage teams in Pokrovsk a couple of days ago take advantage of the fact that one of the brigades simply ran out of infantry. So one of the brigades in here, ran out of infantry. A brigade is very large. So it was inaccurate reporting of the situation on the ground. The situation urgently corrected. The search and destruction of these groups is still ongoing. Some have been killed, others not yet. The goal is clear. The Russians want to establish a foothold, wait for reinforcements, and take control of the defenders of Ukrainian streets. So there's still teams that could be inside here. Unfortunately, we've lost on our side. In addition, the amount of friendly fire has increased since everyone knew about the sabotage groups almost immediately, but most had no understanding of the routes where they were located. Therefore, news related to such infiltration should be presented with a cool head. This is a critical situation in Pokrovsk for some time, and growing more and more critical, especially now with AMK mapping saying that there's been a large breakthrough on the eastern flank. So you can see this grey zone all the way up to basically between Novo-Shakhove and Vilny. And what we'll talk about is how far on the north is this. This is some 20 kilometers north of the center of Pokrovsk, and then that wrap around. But only just before I went live, AMK mapping, who's very reliable, then posted this map. So you can see where Pankivka is, you can see where Volodymyrivka is, as well as this Nikhanorivka as well. And you can see where he's showing major movements from Verivkia all the way through these sectors as well outside of the grey zone. And what he says here, in a follow-up tweet, he goes, it's one of the biggest breakthroughs since Ukraine in Kherson Oblast in 2022, achieving a tactical breakthrough, I believe, just over 30 kilometre squares. They were able to consolidate their positions in Mayak. Outflanking attacks have already taken place in Pankivka, but it's unclear if any positions were captured along then the road itself. These roads that head along Novoshakovka as well, but further expanding the control here. It's becoming a critical situation. And you know how I said you pay the piper? Well, reality when there's reality being hidden, that reality comes to the forefront very, very quickly. And Deep State posted this, and this sounds exactly like if I had written this several months ago. So let's speak about then the Russians are gradually shifting their tactics. Marking positions simply based on video no longer works, as we've stressed for a long time. Lately, similar situations have been happening across parts of the front. We say this, that just because you see someone somewhere could just be grey zone. But the shifting of tactics, it's not happening now. It's already happened. It's happened months and months and months ago. But this is where the reality comes to the forefront. And what Tatsugami says, you get this pendulum swing of optimism to pessimism. Small enemy groups are not just putting pressure on Ukrainian positions, but are tasked with pushing as deep as possible into the rear, hiding somewhere, and trying to survive long enough to allow another group to follow. It's been happening for months and months. This is why we see that tactics shift with then things like motorcycles, scooters, and lighter vehicles to be able to do this and leverage off that position. But in most cases, the soldier or small group manages to sneak in the rear, never leaves. So they say that they are then killed. They say drone operators or artillery try to eliminate them immediately. But also what you need to think about is that they are able to get several kilometres behind the line. It tells you about how thin the defences are on many of the lines. But this then goes into the catastrophic shortage of troops. The Russian attempts give them advantage in advancing. Since they scatter forces and attention that are diverted to locating and destroying these small groups, the Russians knowingly go to die in these one-way assault missions. No one goes in knowing you're going to die. You've accepted that may happen, but it's not a meat wave attack. No, there is still method to the madness to try and do this. It may have a high loss ratio, but it's not just, it's just thrown away into this. A major issue is the catastrophic shortage of troops on the Ukrainian side, which makes it impossible to quickly plug gaps in the lines. And this is what you and I have been speaking of for months and months, that will get worse and worse and worse as attrition then comes to fruition over many, many months, is that Russians will push on many different axes, and therefore Ukraine will not be able to plug that. And when they plug an area here, it will create a problem back here, and you're constantly moving around. It's Brusilov Offensive 101. But the catastrophic shortage of troops. And we need to link where war is politics by other means. This is all like an organism. You have what we see Zelensky doing at the moment, blatant government corruption cover-up. We have critical manpower shortages, and we have desertion at all-time highs. This is a catastrophic mix for attritional war. Low morale, not enough men, disbelief in the government. Not great. Since the enemy is able to infiltrate their zones, the grey area grows and can change colour at any moment, usually to red. So what I'm saying is, well, if it goes red, usually I'd actually say that then these are more successful than they are unsuccessful. These are realities of war where the enemy, with a numerical advantage infantry, willing to die in one-way assault missions, continues to advance steadily. What this means, in other terms, is enemy or soldiers who actually have morale on the front line. Exactly what I reported well over a year ago when one of my friends on the front line said these Russian soldiers came on motorcycles and we cut them down with machine guns. We cut them down easily, but not one person in my trench has the morale to actually go and launch a mission like that. The numerical advantage in infantry is exactly what we've spoken about against pushing on many different sectors and the inability to plug this. This is why I don't launch fucking Kursk. At the same time, we face a shortage of personnel, which opens gaps in defence. False reporting about the real situation on the ground only fuels this problem and increases the enemy's success. I could have written this last paragraph a year ago. One example is the situation in Pokrovsk, which we wrote about yesterday. And, of course, that what was written about was then that Russian reconnaissance sabotage team that we've seen. So let's actually get then into the maps. And we see July 23rd of July, 456 kilometres being made kilometre squares, likely is going to be larger than the month before. Be very interested to see what Syriac and AMK mapping say. So let's have a look at Syriac maps, and we're going to belt feed through some of these. So let's go on the western side of Pokrovsk, or Pokrovsk actual as we... Actually, no, sorry, I messed up there. What I want to do is actually show you the red check since I left the US. So we're going to go back onto the 20th. and then turn this on. So when we last spoke, we spoke about some ground being made on the northeast of Pokrovsk, ground being made then to the west of Pokrovsk and around Velika Novosylkia as well as Russia making some ground then around Siversk as well. That was back on the 20th. So let's then step up to the 21st, turn this on. Remember, the red check indicates Russian advancement. Russian advancement to the then northwest of Velika Novosylka, filling in this large gap from Horokove to Zeleny Kut. I believe all of this is likely red at the moment down here. We see Pokrovsk, Shevchenko, some ground being made as well, filling in Mirolubivkia, filling in Popov Yar, and I believe that is all we have for then the 21st. Come to then the 22nd, we'll turn this back on. We can see where Russia is focusing a lot of assets, movement on the northeast of Pokrovsk, that wrap around that we then speak of. We see to then Pokrovsk, where this is meeting the Velika front. Remember, these two separate axes are all becoming one. Again, we're going to see axes and advancements turn into large territorial gains. We see Velika Novosylka area then expanding in control as well. And then we come up to today, turn this back on, and we see advancements on many areas. We see Terney front line, Karpivkia, Russians making some ground in here, creating a massive kill box in and around Borova. We see more ground being made in the Kremenar forest. We see Toretsk ground being made in Delivkia as well as Leonidivkia. Again, still not showing grey zone up to the areas we know where there were forces, and that this area, Myrny, Voskorenskia, with more red control. Again, this likely will fill in. It's been filled in on Surek for some time. And again, that will give us a bump in those kilometre squares figures. So we'll come back into Pokrovsk. Now we're caught up on the deep state map. We'll show you where the other maps have been speaking about. Remember, Derner and Shevchenko, there did show to be some ground being made on the deep state map. Surek maps, he talks about the same area, at least down in here as well, with some ground being made. So we know there was advancements in at least similar directions. Now let's go on the Pokrovsk eastern side. We spoke about where AMK said that there was one of the largest breakthroughs since then, 22 Kharkiv Kherson, and we can see where this has been growing from Suryak maps. Now we can see that there was some localized Ukrainian recapturing of areas as well. Just down in this sector here by Suryak, we have then this coming back, and this is what we speak about, the liquidity. You can make some and then lose more. You can do a step forward and two steps back. That can happen on offensive and defensive actions, and it does look like this is somewhat what has occurred in this front area. So we come onto then the next day, more ground being made around where these reservoirs are in here, getting filled in. That ground around Mirolubivkia, this whole area getting filled in, building that flank on Minograd as well, Pokrovsk. More ground being made on then the northern side, Popov Yar area, and more ground then being made up into then Mayak and the Petrivkia, as is it Petrivkia in here? Pankivkia, apologies, as well. And then that filling in. And of course, this map is then behind what AMK said. So showed up to this, but then showed that large expansion built on that foundation. And that is what attritional warfare grinding forward movement looks like, is to build the foundation, attrit down, and then you start exploiting that into much larger territorial gains. So let's move right from here, right up into the north, and we'll come back over some areas. So of course we have where Ukraine started the Kursk offensive and now can't turn off the Kursk offensive now that Russia is pushed back into Sumy. But there has been a bit of back and forward on here, and we have then where Ukraine has made some ground back in the Belove district. So in and around this sector right in here, again, not going to be shown on this map because if it wasn't shown in the beginning, or again, you're not going to see some of it, as well as closing up back to the border areas as well. Now, we have a second map update in here showing that out from Yanakivkia in between Yambalivkia, that Russia made some advances to the south in here. Ukraine making some more areas right in this blue that have been shown for some time, as well as some further areas made out from Yambalivkia as well. So still liquid in this front line. Russia filling back in some of these recently gained areas from Ukraine and then exploiting in between Oleksivkia and Yambalivkia right in here, showing that that is filled in this area along where some of these roads run down in these sectors. And again, axes to turn into a large advancement. But that isn't all that we have. So if we come across, we have Kharkiv Oblast, of course we have Volchansk, Lipsy front line, and we see this, that right up in this corner, it's saying that Russia has in Datane captured some ground. The problem here is, again, I don't think this in here, same as this area in here, Milove, same as, I think this area, Milove, this Datane, Volchansk, all the way to Sumy, these are not going to become primary axes. But what does it do? Well, Ukraine needs to deploy a shitload of troops in here to stop it becoming that, or in case it does become that, again, exactly what Deep State talks about, exactly what attritional warfare doctrine talks about, of you have, if you're numerically superior, you push on many different areas and thin out the front lines, therefore we have DRG troops working several kilometres behind the front. Now we have one more area in the north around Volchansk. The island boys of Kindrashivkia are still in there. Again, it will not look like that, but we have then this, and of course we have two axes, Kindrashivkia, Radkivkia, Surak suggesting that these have met up in the middle, turning this into, again, weighed out on this. Let's move our way down and we'll come into Terni, where of course we see some advancement in here. But Surak tells a bit of a different image to this of some back and forward. And again, nothing is linear or constant in a war like this. So we have this whole Terni front. Of course, we have down to Torsky. And what we do see over the past days is this has become a lot of grey zone in this front line, as well as some red check today. So confirming there's definitely been some amount of movement in here. And we have, wrong map for you. I want to skip forward to this one here. We see some ground being made in this direction by the Russian forces by Suryak maps. Again, Suryak maps in this direction here, so we can confirm this movement down, this grey zone expanding movement in this area here. Then we can confirm this. So what I've said, if I was a Ukrainian commander, other than Pokrovsk, the number one area I'd focus is to not let the Russians get this foothold in Kharkivkia and create a gap in here, which is just going to massively attrit your forces with drones and fabs and artillery. So what we see is it does look like there has been some localized attacks here to recapture some areas in the eastern part of Kharkivkia. If you don't know what I'm speaking about, is Ukraine is blockaded by the Oskil Reservoir all the way down here. Russians on this side, the only way in and out of this whole sector is through this small 12-kilometre gap, which will be massively saturated with assets, but purposefully not closed up to cause a larger rate of attrition. Remember, Russia's goal, number one, is to reduce Ukrainian potential, to influence politics by war by reducing potential. It's a savage way of war, but it's what it is. And Surak saying there's been more ground, small bit of ground made just to the north of Zeleny Hay on this front. So let's move our way down to Toretsk, where of course we did see that red check today. Now we're just going to belt feed through this in here because we do have then six Toretsk updates. So let's show you this. So we have day 1240, then eastern and western side, and then ground being made in the middle, ground being made on the western and eastern sides, again growing more on the eastern side, then that expanding as well across the canal district, so right up in this area, leveraging off that canal into, then they're putting Konstantinivka at threat as well, and then further expansion right up around Alexandro Shutney as well. So he's suggesting all this area is being filled in, and the battle for Pokrovsk, as reported the other day, is really coming to an end. So that is the last map we have there. Now, while we're in this area, let's talk about Chasiv Yar, because again, these are mutually beneficial axes that Russians are pushing around Chasiv Yar and have been for some time. So let's have a look at what he has said. Complete the district of Shevchenka and entered the Pivdeni district, as well as the first houses located adjacent locality of Mykolaievka as well. So we look at where then Mykolaievka is all around this, that further expansion moving west. So all the way down to Stopochke, all the way up in here being movement, at least shown by Suryak maps. We have then further advancement being shown here, and where we have Maiske as well. So this is Maiske up in here, and he is showing that all the way through to here, out of then the Kalinivka front line at one point is then coming under the control of the Russian forces. If this is correct, by here to here, some say 2 kilometers behind the line, and he's grinding forward of a few kilometers at a time. Again, it's very, very hard to stop this slow grinding momentum, and what happens is it gets worse and worse over time. Then you have internal disruption like we are seeing, and you rot from the inside. We come down into the south, of course. We've seen over the past months, Plavny, Kamianske, there has been Russian advancements in here. Today being shown no different by Syriac maps. During the last 10 days, Russian army continued increasing the buffer zone in Kamianske after the capture of the locality. So Kamianske, he's saying, has been fully occupied, and further movements then increasing the buffer zone around here. We won't measure it at this point in time, but again, keep an eye out on that. Actually, one thing I do want to do is, has the grey zone increased around here? Maybe not. It's always telling when we see deep state increased grey zone. Syriac say there's been movement, or AMK, and then what do we see in a couple of days later? Yeah, probably see the grey zone move. Velika Nova Silka area, we have, of course, more movement over here every day. And of course, multiple axes then meeting up. This will likely close in the coming days. So let's belt feed through some of these as well. So we have down, after a brief consolidation, the Russians failed to consolidate around then this Vokserenskia. On the other hand, Russian forces and Zelensky. Hey, so we can see back on 1240 day, we do see Ukraine making some ground on the north and the western side of this. But this is what we talk about. This is why you need to look over multiple different days, because people on this day online would have gone, the tide is shifting. But again, this is where you get steps forward and back in Vokserenskia as well. Then we come to the next days. We have around Novopil, Ukraine recapturing some areas as well. So this is further down. We have Novopil here, Vokserenskia, Yalta, Dashna area, some ground being made back. But then we see over the following days, a lot of this, if not more, gets turned around. So in the northeastern side, we have, if I can zoom in on this, around then your Yalta areas into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, as well as Dashna. You can see where this road heads up around Dashna. All of this filling back in. This area filling back in around Vokserenskia as well here. And then down around Novopil, further expansion of control as well. And then we come to the next day, further expansion along Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, using the water there as a natural barrier, border. See further advancement out on this same direction that we see in the red check. Then we see the next day further, then expanding on that control, that grind forward, and then push forward again. And then we can see this 3 days in a row. See where this is here? Then we see the next day, then the next day, grind, grind, grind. You're on the northern side of Vokserenskia as per this map shows today. But of course, showing that this has filled in, and likely, it's more likely to move like that than like this. It's more likely that an attritional war moves, just keep an eye on this sector, like bang, 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 rather than axes of fingers heading out in a war of attrition versus a war of maneuver. So I think a lot of people have had a bit of a reality check today on something. If you did bring this up before today, if you brought up elections, you're Putin's best mate. And this is where two things can be right at the same time. You can say, hey, look, I think that there's this slip into autocracy, and something like elections or something like anti-corruption bureaus, because Ukraine is known for having corruption. We know they've had an overthrow of leaders before. Hey, maybe we should look at this. And if people who support Russia say very similar, even if in this it's completely from different areas, but it may match, it doesn't mean then that that is a Kremlin talking point that should be disregarded. And as I've said, those pointing out Ukrainian corruption may actually say, yeah, but I want the best for the people, because all these pricks at the top are taking tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars off the top, enriching themselves. I want that money to go to the guys on the front line to increase their ability to actually defend. That is the most pro stance you can actually take, of actually being the sunlight as disinfectant, not all these pricks online who claim they support Ukraine, who have blood on their hands, because all they ever do is hide leadership mistakes, hide command errors, and say that everything is perfect and winning without actually bringing up issues that could have a positive effect on the movement of the front or have a positive effect on the existence of the state in a decade. Legends, I hope that you have a fantastic day. I'm going to go, I can't sleep because I need to try and get out of this jet lag. I don't know where the cover for this microphone is gone. I'll find it or I'll get a new one off Amazon. Have a great day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.